never dreamt that the first thing Dongling said to me after being rescued was a request for a divorce. Not long ago, we had 2 days and 2 nights of heavy rain in our area. Initially, our home started to flood, and our son and daughter were playing happily in the water. Thinking the rain would subside, I didn't expect that at around 1 a.m., the village chief sent a message to our group, saying that this was a once in 50 years heavy rain, and upstream flood discharge was imminent. We were told to evacuate promptly. By the time Dongling woke me up, the floodwaters were already up to our waists. I rushed to our new house to rescue my mother, settling her there. She wanted to go back to save Dongling and the children. Seeing the water rising to chest level, I couldn't cross it, so I resorted to repeatedly calling the village chief and Dongling on my phone. The neighbors informed me that they had been transferred to a safe place by the rescue team, which eased my anxiety. As the day broke, the heavy rain turned into a light drizzle, and the floodwaters gradually receded. I hurried over to find them. When Dongling saw me, she said, "I want a divorce. I can't accept that my husband abandoned us, mother and son." She returned to her mother's house with the children in the rain, and my mother, worried about her grandson not being at home, couldn't eat and asked me to apologize to Dongling and bring them back. I called her 3 times, and she didn't answer. Even in the evening, she didn't return my calls, which frustrated me. Since I had offered her an opportunity, and she didn't take it, I decided to let her stay at her mother's house to cool off. On that cold night, half of the moon hung diagonally in the sky, and the stars twinkled. A chilly wind swept through, rustling up a host of past memories. Dongling and I were college classmates, often going to the seaside together. The sunlight poured onto the beach, and at that time, when our eyes met, they were full of each other's reflections. The only downside was that her mother had a mental illness and had been on medication for over 20 years. She still needed medication to maintain a normal life. My mother didn't like the idea of her being from this kind of family, fearing she would affect my future. But I was determined that she was my wife, and my mother couldn't persuade me otherwise. Before our marriage, my mother demanded that Dongling get pregnant before entering our family. Dongling disagreed and insisted on getting married before having children. I respected her decision. My mother said it wasn't about selling her daughter but about finding a balance. She asked for a dowry of 2,800 yuan, and if Dongling agreed to marry, that would be enough. If not, we'd forget about it. Even if she agreed to marry, I shouldn't pamper her too much, otherwise, it would lead to problems. I agreed with my mother's perspective. So, I told Dongling that we should start our marriage with a good omen, and 2,800 yuan as a dowry would suffice. She pouted and asked, "If it's for a good omen, how about 9,999 yuan? Let's marry for a long, happy life together." What she said made sense, and I conveyed this to my mother. My mother said it wasn't about selling her daughter but about finding a balance, so I eventually paid a dowry of 6,800 yuan and bought Dongling 2 sets of new clothes. We got our marriage certificate. Dongling is a carefree person. Just like before, she held my hand and we went to various places to enjoy life. Our days were like a slowly turning wheel, unhurried and unharried. Shortly after our wedding, Dongling became pregnant, and her morning sickness caused me a headache. When she had severe nausea, eating noodles could make her vomit from her nostrils. I found it revolting and would leave the house to get some fresh air, returning only after she was done vomiting. Dongling saw me return and asked why I had run away. Seeing her pale face, I tried to appease her and said, "I couldn't stand your vomiting, that's why I left. Now don't be angry. Next time, I'll rub your back." I went out for a walk and found a nearby stinky tofu stall. "Let's go eat stinky tofu." Upon hearing the mention of stinky tofu, Dongling playfully hit me on the chest with a clenched fist while pouting. I smiled and held her hand as we went out to buy stinky tofu. She resigned from her job and went back home to focus on her pregnancy when she was 5 months pregnant. My mother commented on her being overly delicate, comparing her to the neighbor's daughter-in-law who was 8 months pregnant and still working. She believed that prenatal checkups were just a ploy by hospitals to make money and pointed out that the neighbor's daughter-in-law had never done any checkups but still gave birth to a healthy and chubby son. I also had my doubts about hospitals trying to make money, and that night, a friend called me saying he lost while playing mahjong and asked to borrow 30,000 yuan. Without a second thought, I transferred the money to him. The next day, Dongling wanted to go for a prenatal checkup. I tried to convince her not to go to the hospital, but she insisted. I told her I didn't have the money, and she asked where the money had gone. When she found out I had lent the money to a friend, we had a heated argument. She accused me of caring more about my friends than her, while I argued that she was being unreasonable, and I needed friends too. She went to the hospital for her prenatal checkup in anger. Just because she was pregnant and wouldn't let me lend money to a friend, I decided to punish her by not speaking to her for a whole 3 months. It wasn't until the holidays were approaching that Dongling wanted to visit her parents. One day, she happily hummed a tune after a phone call with her mother. My mother glanced at her and said, "Your mother is crazy, you better not be crazy too." Dongling's smile disappeared, and when I got home at night, after a long day at the store, I heard her complaining about my mother's sharp tongue. Seeing her initiate a conversation with me, I replied, "My mom might have a sharp tongue, but she has a good heart. Don't overthink it." Dongling accused our family of ganging up on her. Raising me wasn't easy for my mother, and she was only verbally criticized. It wasn't as if we were bullying her. It was clear that she was finding trouble where there was none. I began to miss the cheerful Dongling I knew before we got married. In the blink of an eye, she was already 8 months pregnant. Her mother-in-law had a mental illness, and her father-in-law took care of her and their land and pigs at home. They couldn't come to assist with the childbirth. My mother mentioned she wasn't feeling well and couldn't go to the hospital, so I had to accompany Dongling to the hospital to give birth. On the day she was giving birth, she was walking around the hospital, holding her waist, and I was uncomfortable with the strong smell of disinfectant in the hospital. I asked her when she would give birth because I wanted to get back home as soon as possible. To my surprise, she scolded me and told me to go away. I felt uncomfortable in my heart but decided not to argue with her since she was about to give birth. Fortunately, she gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. For the sake of the children, I forgave her. My mother mentioned that she was too old to take care of the children, so Dongling stayed at home full-time to care for them. One night, the 4 of us were playing in the bedroom, and Dongling mentioned wanting her mother to visit us for a few days. My mother burst into the room and said, "Your mother is crazy, and I won't allow her to come here." Tears welled up in Dongling's eyes as she watched my mother's outburst. I scolded my mother, saying, "Next time, knock before entering the room," and then turned to Dongling, "My mom doesn't want your mom to come, so we won't let her." Dongling cried continuously. What was there to cry about? Once you're married, you should prioritize our family, not keep thinking about your parents. As the new year approached, Dongling's father suddenly had a stroke, leaving him paralyzed and unable to speak. Dongling wanted to visit her parents, but my mother argued that we were building a house, and if Dongling visited and her father passed away, it would bring bad luck, so she couldn't go. Holding our daughter, Dongling looked at me, tears in her eyes. My mother agreed, saying it would bring bad luck, and she shouldn't go see her father. When I told her she couldn't go back to her parents, she left, carrying our daughter, saying she would walk there. I pulled her back by the collar, and our daughter cried loudly as we argued. Dongling called me a pervert. Her father managed to survive through the new year, and on the second day of the Lunar New Year, I accompanied Dongling to her parents' home. Her father was lying in bed and said to me, "If two people truly love each other, they should treat each other well. Being able to become a couple isn't easy." Dongling covered her mouth and ran outside to cry. In April, her father passed away, and I gave Dongling 3,000 yuan as a token of respect, which I felt a son-in-law should give for the father's debts. I chose not to attend his funeral. Dongling left the children at home to attend her father's funeral and returned with an increasingly eccentric personality. She would only talk to me about the children and nothing else. Sometimes, when I got irritated at the children's noise at night, I asked Dongling to take the kids to my mother's room to avoid disturbing our intimacy. She would yell at me for that. In one fit of anger, I mentioned divorce, and she cried and protested, calling me heartless. I thought to myself, what kind of husband doesn't allow his wife to sleep as she wishes? She's my wife, she should be able to sleep with whomever she wants, right? She accused me of never caring about her struggles with raising the children and asked why she was the only one with so much resentment. What's so tiring about staying at home and taking care of the children? There are so many mothers who do it. During this time, we argued every day, and on one occasion during dinner, my mother commented that Dongling's personality was too strong and that it was an honor for her to marry me. She said women should be gentler, learn to yield, and at home, the husband is like heaven, so she should listen to her husband. Dongling got so angry that she flipped the table. My mother scolded Dongling, saying she had a mother to give birth but not to raise, and that her own mother had a mental illness. Dongling raised her hand and slapped my mother, who cried on the floor. Daughter-in-law hits the mother-in-law. Marrying a woman like this is a family's misfortune. My mother had a tough life, working hard to support my education. She saved her money for a lifetime, and all of it was spent on me. Before I got married, I repeatedly advised Dongling to get along well with my mother. My mother only scolded her a little, and she dared to physically attack my mother in front of me, just as my mother had warned that spoiling her would lead to trouble. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I raised my hand and slapped Dongling. She covered her left cheek and pushed me away, then called my younger uncle to come and seek justice. In no time, my younger uncle arrived with friends and a large steel pipe, and he swung it at my head. My head began bleeding profusely, and I had to go to the hospital for stitches. After leaving the hospital, I stared at my younger uncle with hatred. When I was in Shenzhen, I had him working with me in the business, but he couldn't handle the hardship, so I offered him a monthly salary to work from home as a customer service representative for my online store. At one point, he asked me to borrow over 10,000 yuan to renovate his house, and he pestered me for 2 years. Dongling lent him 50,000 yuan to get him off her back. In recent years, due to the decline in business, I returned to my hometown to run a store. Seeing that I wasn't as well off as before, he resorted to violence. I asked my younger uncle to return the money, but he claimed it was a gift from his sister. Since his sister and her money were both mine, and I had earned all the money, I gave him 2 choices: repay the debt or have his sister kneel down and apologize to my mother. Otherwise, I would report him and have him sent to jail. My younger uncle clenched his fist, ready to attack me, but Dongling pulled him back. She knelt down and apologized to my mother sincerely. Seeing her apologize, I forgave her. From then on, she stopped resisting my mother's words. When our 2 children missed me, they would video chat with me, and she stopped crying in front of me. Life became as calm as water, but some things changed behind the scenes. At the beginning, we were 2 people in love, but after getting married, she no longer showed the same patience with me. When the flood came, I didn't think too much about it. I assumed that Dongling would wake the children and escape with them, and I went to save my mother first before returning to rescue them. After all, she and the children were unharmed. Was it wrong for me to save my own mother? Why did she bring up the idea of divorce? My mother, upon hearing that Dongling wanted a divorce, said that she couldn't let the 2 children suffer in their mentally ill grandmother's house. She saw me bringing them back home. One night, around 10 p.m., after having a little alcohol, I went to my mother-in-law's house. My daughter heard my voice and eagerly ran to open the door. I patted her head and looked around, realizing that my younger uncle was not at home, and my mother-in-law was already asleep. I called into the guest room, "Darling, I'm here to take you home." Dongling, with a stern expression, asked what I wanted. I smiled and said, "I've come to take you and the kids home. Kindergarten is about to resume regular classes, and the children need to go back to school." She told me to get lost or she would call the police. Hearing this, I reached out to embrace her, thinking that we could reconcile through physical intimacy, as it often worked for husband and wife after a fight. However, she locked herself in the room, and I pounded on the door from the outside. When spouses quarrel at the head of the bed, they make up at the foot of the bed, and as long as we were affectionate, we could reconcile. Dongling hid in the room and locked the door. I tried to talk to her, but she pulled my hand and faced her grandfather. She said, "There's nothing wrong. The kids' father misses them and came to see them. You go back to your room and sleep, Grandpa." Grandpa walked back and forth between us, asking, "Is it true?" Dongling nodded vigorously, and I interrupted, "Grandpa, Dongling wants a divorce. She wants to take the children somewhere else and never let me see them again." The air fell silent, and she couldn't bear to look at her grandfather. I had expected Grandpa to take my side, but he surprised me by saying, "It's not easy for 2 people to become a married couple, especially when they have children. I believe that most women, when they get married, don't think about divorce. If it's really unbearable, then let it be." Dongling persisted in wanting a divorce. I shouted at her, "Why do you insist on getting a divorce? I admit that I haven't been perfect, but I haven't cheated, gambled, or done anything harmful. I provide for you, give you shelter, what more do you want? Are you so selfish that you have to break up a family? Have you considered the children? Do you have someone else outside?" Winterling cursed me, and I felt a surge of anger. I tried to drag her back home, but she used all her strength to break free from my grip. Even though I wanted to bring her home peacefully, I ended up grasping her hair and pulling her towards the door. Our 2 children were crying and pleading, "Daddy, don't hurt Mommy, please stop." "Sweetie, don't be scared, I'll protect Mommy," Grandpa said, clenching his fists as he approached to intervene. He's quite old, and his involvement was unnecessary. I tried to fend him off, raising my hand to stop him, but he stumbled and fell on the couch, clutching his chest and groaning. Winterling managed to break free and rushed to the kitchen, grabbing a knife, hysterically threatening to harm me. Seeing her in this frenzied state, I decided to leave, forcefully slamming the door behind me, almost wanting to shatter it. My mother, aware of Winterling's determination to divorce, was furious and suggested, "Let the woman who caused all this trouble compensate with 200,000 and leave our family. You bring my grandsons back." I didn't want a divorce and, a week later, I found Winterling again, pleading with her to stop the conflict and bring our 2 children back home. She looked at me with swollen eyes full of resentment, saying, "That night when you pushed my grandfather to the hospital, the doctor said he's old and can't withstand any more shocks. We need to prepare ourselves." I couldn't understand her fear. It was just a push, what's the big deal? In an effort to get her back home, I cautiously proposed, "I'll take care of the arrangements for your grandfather's affairs, let's put the past behind us, and we can live as a family of 4. Can we do that?" But Winterling cried and protested, "We can never go back. Out of the love we once shared, I beg you to give me a way out." Looking at the woman I had loved deeply for years, I couldn't fathom why, despite my sincere apologies, she couldn't let go of her grudges and start anew with me.